Welcome into this edition of Mondays in Midtown. I'm your host, Willie McKenna, as we're going to be bringing you Great Harvest as our very first story. This is a chain quite like the bread company, but listen, folks, it's a little bit more based towards nutrition, so you're going to want to check out this next story. Let's go ahead and throw it over to Amanda Huntingford as we take a look at Great Harvest.
The second you open the door of the Great Harvest Bread Company on Argonne Drive, you are immediately hit by the aroma of fresh baked bread, while your eyes are greeted by the sight of baked goods, wheat stalks, and bread. Shelves and shelves of bread.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am terrific.
How about you, sir?
What are you baking today? What's the best?
Well, you know, everybody has their own favorites, but this is really good. This is our Savannah bar.
Oh,
It has peaches and raspberries.
That looks good.
Would you like to try a piece of that?
I would love some of that.
All right, there you go. We also have, just came out of the oven, our Dakota bread, and that is our honey wheat bread, just like this, but we fill it with sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds and sesame seeds and millet. It's a really good crunchy bread.
This is really good.
That is the next thing you will likely notice, the offer of a generous sample from a smiling employee. Take it. I particularly recommend the cranberry orange scone or the pumpkin chocolate chip muffin.
Well, I've just always thought it'd be kind of a fun business to run. I always liked going to the Great Harvest that used to be in Kirkwood. And Judy said she did too.
He and his wife, Judy, opened the Kirkwood Great Harvest Bread Company in May. The idea, however, originated years ago. After they made that initial decision to open the store, the two had a long road of work ahead.
We had to go to Dillon, Montana, where the franchise headquarters is, and go through what they call the Discovery Day, where they kind of size you up as owners and make sure you understand what you'll be getting into.
Well, we had to go through a lot of training before we opened. With the franchise, we spent time at the franchise office training, learning how to bake bread and sweets, and learning all about running a business and inventory control.
There's all sorts of red tape you got to go through from all kinds of government agencies. Then there's picking a contractor, signing agreements with them, and getting through all of the build-out process and all the surprises you have in an old building like this.
This wasn't the end of the tasks. They still had to do all of the decorating, come up with a layout, pick out the signage, find and buy all of the equipment from the big fancy ovens down to their measuring cups, choose an opening menu, stock the ingredients, hire people, and train them.
It was a huge undertaking.
Now that they're open, the work hasn't let up. Keeping up with the daily operations can lead to a very long day. The first person arrives at the store at 4 a.m., and the last person doesn't leave until 7 p.m. I asked Tom to run through the daily schedule.
2 people come in at 4 a.m. One's a sweets baker that tries to get all of the sweets baked and ready to go by 7 when we open. And the other one starts the breads, and that's a busy process in itself. We usually do 6 or 7 varieties of bread a day. 3 hours after it gets started, it's on the kneading table, and where we shape it into whatever product, rolls, loaves, half loaves. Some things we roll out and swirl. The breads don't start coming out of the oven until 9:30, where the sweets are all pretty much finished by 7 when we open. A counter person come in at 6:30 that starts to make all the coffee and get everything else set up and ready to go, including setting out all the sweets and merchandising displays. Then the kneading team comes in at 7:30 when the first doughs are ready to go, and they're working till about 10:30 or 11. 3 people doing that. The sandwich crew starts as somebody comes in at 10 to be prepping the meats and cheeses and vegetables for the sandwiches. And we serve sandwiches from only 11 to 2. We lock the doors at 6, and the fastest we can possibly get everything ready to, all cleaned up and ready to go is about 6:30, but it's usually 7 or later before the day's done here.
I'm here for the good days. I go home and take a nap in the middle of the day.
In the beginning, Tom was both the first person in and the last person out. Now he's found enough bakers that he doesn't have to arrive until 6 a.m. each morning. One of those bakers is SLU senior Billy Bomarito. Which one are you working on now?
Well, right now I'm making Great Harvest Dillon cookies.
Oh, it's the best. That's the most important thing.
People love these.
Yeah. Oh,
People go nuts over these.
Yeah,
get started on those. You have a terrible batch stop. I had my first one the other day. Because I'm only here from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. So I'm just, you know, I'm out of here before anything exciting goes on. And so yesterday, or 2 days ago, we were doing all sorts of stuff for Thanksgiving and everyone. So I stayed late and had my first Dylan cookie, and it was the best thing I ever had. I try to be done at 5:30 so that it doesn't mess up her schedule, because she's got to get on the mixer right about the time that I try to be finished, but that doesn't always work. So I have 10 minutes to finish this up. So we have one big old batch, and I actually gave myself instructions on how to split a batch properly. You take 8 pounds or whatever, and you put them in this cookie press, and you have to cut them up into equal pieces. And so this just allows for different 8-pound measurements. Make it a nice even 8 pounds. Take a bunch of this, and throw it right back in. And it'll work no matter what you put in there. But we like to get 8 pounds just because that's, well, that's what it says. And if they're different measurements, the cookies will be different sizes. So if you put, you know, 6 pounds of dough in this press, they'll just be little tiny thin cookies versus 8 pounds. They'll just be thinner and smaller. And we want our customers to have the most cookie they could ever want.
Each cookie sheet is labeled before being placed on the baking tray to safeguard against mix-ups. Now that the cookies just need to bake, it's time to make the oatberry muffins and cranberry orange scones.
Use an ice cream scoop.
Yeah, this is a number 8 scoop. I think it is, that means it's 1/8 of a quart, which maybe is a half a cup. Well, it is a half a cup. And so we just scoop these out into level scoops and stick them right here on the pan. And they puff up nice and big, and they're light and airy, and you have them with a cup of coffee, and they're delicious.
Billy finishes scooping the cranberry orange scones, and while they cook, preps the oatberry muffins, which use applesauce instead of oil. Now, the Savannah bars need to come out of the oven.
They're in there for 85 minutes. Sorry, I'm running all over the place. And we put those in for a good 85 minutes. Oh, there they are. That stops the whole machine, and that reverses it back to the shelf I want. And a lot of people, this is kind of like a breakfast sort of bar. We got coconut and oats and fruit and berries and all sorts of good stuff. Yeah, it looks really nice, and people love them. Something glaze on the scones here. It says to make it a glaze. I lean towards an icing, but
The last item left to bake today is the pumpkin chocolate chip muffins.
okay, so we have the pumpkin wet ingredients all mixed up over there. Now we have cinnamon and allspice and sugar and flour and a little baking soda, a little baking powder, and without fail, we have a big old cloud of cinnamon dust. Although that wasn't very big, but sometimes it'll make you cough. We're just gonna do a couple pans of muffins here, and then get going on some pumpkin loaves, and that's it. And we leave that one open just because those don't bake very well in the middle. And so on these guys, I'm just doing 4 scoops. So it's like 4 muffins worth. And then I swirl the top just because if you do these scoops like this and then you don't do that, then you have like a big butt and it doesn't, I don't know. We like to keep this a family-friendly place, so.
The last thing Billy has to do is check the cookies and make sure they're nice and flat rather than filled with air bubbles.
And now those are your beautiful Dylan cookies and peanut butter and chocolate chip peanut butter.
Great Harvest mills their own flour in-house, and before we left, Tom agreed to show me the mill and some of the intricacies of baking bread.
It starts with 60-pound bags of just wheat. I'll show you what that looks like. Specially selected by the Great Harvest franchise, working with family farmers in Montana. So this is hard red spring wheat. We also, for some other products, use golden wheat, which is similar, but it's a lighter wheat and easy substitute sometimes for white flour. So we got those two kinds. We mill both of those. So there'll be a little flour shooting up, but that's all right. Okay. Turn off the feed. Okay. This batch of flour is done milling. There's 180 pounds of flour in here. The mill heats it up when as it grinds it. So to cool it off enough to be good for making bread, we put in some cooling tubes. It's just copper pipe that helps cool out the middle, because the flour insulates itself and it'll stay hot in the middle for a long time otherwise. So that be used tomorrow. It takes about, a day. We mill it a day ahead of time.
First, Tom has to test the temperature of the dough to make sure it's ready and going to make good bread. Then, they use a lift to raise the bowl above the table and push it out onto the kneading table. Great Harvest then uses a scale to make sure each loaf ends up the same size, 2 pounds, 5 ounces. When the bread leaves the oven, however, it weighs only 2 pounds, 2 ounces. Each loaf will lose about 3 ounces of moisture in the baking process. Each chunk of dough is kneaded into a perfect loaf and placed in a bread pan to rise. The dough is then painted with egg whites to make it cook better and decorated. After the bread has risen for the proper amount of time, it is placed in the oven to cook. The first breads are out of the oven every morning at 10 a.m., but it will take about 45 minutes until they are cool enough to slice. Once he'd explained the process, Tom let me step in to help. Great Harvest Bread Company uses fresh eggs, fresh yeast, and the only sweetener in their breads is honey. The Honigforts love that about Great Harvest. Everything is baked fresh every day with natural ingredients. Despite the work, the Honigforts love their job, the area, and the baking. According to them, it's a lot of fun, but you have to be crazy to do it.
Thank you, Amanda, for that great look at the Great Harvest. Definitely have to go out there sometime and check out those nutritious goodies. Coming up next, we have a sports panel. Aaron Berg joined us from SLU Sports. Talked a little bit about Billiken basketball. Let's go ahead and take a look at what he had to say. And welcome back into Mondays in Midtown. We are now joined with Aaron Berg from SLU Sports, as he's going to be bringing us our sports panel for the week. Aaron, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good. Sitting here at the desk. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with a little bit of Billiken basketball. Billikens have been on a roll here lately. Big win on the Blue Out at the Chaffetz Arena this past Saturday. What do you have to say about that? 10,000 plus. You were in the student section. Just talk about the atmosphere first.
Well, first off, the atmosphere was amazing. I've been here 2 years and haven't seen atmosphere at a basketball game quite like that. We had all the students out for the Blue Out. We had the St. Louis community out just supporting their team, and to top it off with a victory and some great play on the court, couldn't have been better.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I was sitting down on the court during that game, right? Oh my gosh, you have no idea how loud that band is when you're sitting in front of it. But anyways, the Billikens played that game against Dayton, come out with a huge victory. I mean, Dayton beat them earlier in the season, first conference game of the year. So, Billiken fans, even with the big turnout, a little bit nervous as to what's going to happen in this game. Are we going to be able to pull it out? But just talk about the performance of the team that day.
Well, and that's the thing. We really saw Kwame Mitchell step up and play like the leader that he is in that game. And just a very good job by him. Good effort by Conklin. And also nice effort by all the role players, too. We had Cody Ellis coming out and showing what he can do, Corey Remican, Jordan Jet. Just a good team effort and great coaching by Majerus and the rest of the Billiken's coaching staff. Just a good all-around effort to come out on top with a victory.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That is one thing that I don't think this Billiken team gets enough credit for is the coaching staff. Great assistant coaches. Chris Harriman, unbelievable, Australian-born, one of the nicest guys I've met in the SLU athletic department. And then obviously Rick Majerus, just so much experience there. And just the way he prepares his team is absolutely incredible. So just the other night, they go to St. Joe's, the Hawks, and they beat them 72-60. Go ahead and talk about their performance. That's the one especially, Cody Ellis. He really stepped it up in that game.
Well, and there's a great example of a role player coming out and playing like a leader. You know, he's not an overly talented player. He's just a good role player and kind of a sixth man on this team. But he really stepped up and played like a leader tonight and really filled in for the other guys who weren't on top of their game. So he really proved what he can do and showed that he can be one of the leaders on this team when he's called upon.
So Billiken's 2 big wins there. Where do you see this team going down the road? They still have to face LaSalle coming up this Saturday. They also have to face Xavier later in the season. How do you see this Atlantic 10 shaping up? Where do the Billikens finish in the Atlantic 10 this year?
Well, I really think that with 2 Holloway struggles for Xavier that SLU can come out on top against them and get past them. I think LaSalle is tougher competition. They match up very well with LaSalle, and it's a very even matchup. But I really think that they can win the A-10 tournament and get into the March Madness tournament and make a run and maybe be the Cinderella story this year because they have just an all-around good team, good role players, great leaders in Kwame Mitchell and Brian Conklin, and great coaching staff to go along with it. I think they can make a run.
Yeah, what kind of atmosphere is that going to be when Xavier comes to town at the Chaffetz?
Well, we saw a great atmosphere in the Blue Out, and that's probably not even half of what we'd see when Xavier comes. That's a great rivalry between Xavier and SLU, and it's going to be just awesome to be at and a great experience for the students in the St. Louis community.
Also, just a little note about that St. Joe's game. The first team they beat with an RPI above 50, so that does a lot for getting them into that NCAA bid as well, which is obviously the ultimate goal, get back to that NCAA tournament, which they haven't been able to do in over a decade now. That is Aaron Berg. I'm Will McKenna. Thank you for listening to this sports panel. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us for our sports panel this week. I know everybody enjoys that, and Billikens are really playing well this year, so let's go Billikens. Coming up next, we have a very important story. Deals with homelessness, which is a big problem here in the St. Louis area. So hopefully this story can raise a little bit of awareness about the homeless situation here in St. Louis.
St. Louis, the gateway to the West, a city that symbolized an opportunity for adventure and a new life for Americans seeking a second chance. However, St. Louis can be seen today as a failing beacon of hope and prosperity, as more and more people lose their homes and are forced to live on the streets.
Well, homelessness does affect a lot of people. A lot of times when I go out and speak to groups, I'll get asked the question, how many people are homeless in St. Louis? And the only true answer is nobody really knows exactly. The estimates range from 15 to 20,000 people in a year are homeless on the streets of St. Louis. That translates to 12 to 1,500 probably per day. So it does affect a lot of people.
So the numbers go up every year. I think some of the trends that are the most startling, the group that is growing the fastest is homeless children.
Homelessness in St. Louis first became a problem in the 1930s.
The biggest shanty towns in the United States during the Depression were here in St. Louis. There were more than 5,000 people living up and down the riverfront during the 30s. There were several major settlements that had names. They actually had, elected officials. I mean, it was almost an honorific. I mean, but there was Hoover Heights, Hooverville, Happytown, Maryville, Main Street. These places had mail service. The school buses picked up their kids. And some of these communities persisted until the 1960s. At that point, you had families that had been basically squatting on public land for 3 generations.
Since the 1970s, homelessness has become a problem again in St. Louis.
Right now, the city estimates that there's between 500 and 600 people living up and down the riverfront. I actually think they're conservative in that number, but that's also just along the riverfront.
For years and years, there was a small group of people living in a tunnel underneath Tucker Boulevard downtown, on the north side of downtown. It's an old railway tunnel that wasn't used anymore. And for probably decades, there were people living in that tunnel just to stay out of the weather. The city announced earlier this year or late in 2009 that they were, because the streets around that area were starting to fail, the supports underneath were rusting and whatever, that they were going to have to fill that tunnel in. Created an issue where these folks had to find somewhere to go. And that's where they moved, is just west of the flood wall downtown on North Riverfront, north of Laclede's Landing. There's a group that calls one of the areas there Hopeville. There are a couple of encampments just a few yards away from each other. One is called Hopeville, the other I think they call it Dignity Village. And now I would guess, and other people have estimated, in the ballpark of 70 to 80 people are living in tents down there.
I feel like homelessness in St. Louis is really easy to get into for a lot of people, and it's really hard to get out of. It's sort of, I would say, sort of the defining experience for most folks that we have here. There are thousands and thousands of reasons that people get into homelessness. They lose a job, a family member gets sick, they get some sort of diagnosis like a mental illness or HIV or cancer or something, and they can't afford it. They have family problems. There's millions and millions of reasons.
I, until May, had a small business. I was in partnership with my 2 roommates. Through jealousy, pettiness, one roommate who is a recovering alcoholic, they basically threw me out, gave me less than a month to find a place, and pushed me out of the business. And on July 4th, I was homeless for 6 hours. I was lucky enough to find a friend to stay with, until I got into Peter and Paul and Positive Directions.
But the bottom line about how people don't get out is they lack access to the necessary resources. Now, part of that is because the system doesn't have a lot of entry points. So if I go and I show up at a mental health center, I don't also get, food stamps, and I don't also get substance abuse treatment, and I don't also get, health care.
I never thought at age 51 I would be homeless.
Do you think you could ever find yourself in that situation?
It's possible, of course. I mean, as I said before, nobody plans like, oh, next week something horrible will happen to me and I won't be able to pay the rent this month, so I'll get kicked out. You don't plan for that.
No, I have a really good family. I would hope not. I don't think anyone plans on that. It's just everything works against you and stuff just doesn't work out.
No, honestly, I have a really good family and people who could help me, so I don't think so.
Oh yeah, I think it could probably happen to anyone. Like, I know a lot of times homelessness is caused by someone has a traumatic brain injury, doesn't have family or someone to support them, they get homeless. So yeah, I can think it happen to anyone.
No, I don't think I will, because I believe I have enough motivation and stuff, and I get the college degree, and I think having a college degree will at least get you a job. I think I've passed that threshold, and unless I completely bomb the rest of my college career, I think I'll be fine.
No matter where you come from, no matter what your education is, it can happen to you at a moment's notice. I had college education. I had a business. You never know what that next step's gonna be for you. It could be out the door and you could be homeless. I never thought at 51 I would end up homeless and be in a transitional housing.
I mean, my family was homeless for a little while. After my parents got divorced, my dad decided that he wanted the house and kicked us out onto the street. We really didn't have anywhere to go. So we had to go live with family for a little bit. I'm sure there are people that just can't afford to pay the rent. People who can't find a place to live, can't find a friend to live with. And then I'm sure there are some people who just, it's their own fault. They're addicted to drugs or they're addicted to alcohol and they can't afford to pay for their own home. It's just, it ruins their life. But sometimes it's not your fault when you end up in that situation. And I think that's important to remember. When you're looking at that person on the side of the street, don't think, oh, they're just dumb and smelly. They put themselves there. You have to think of circumstance as well. But statistically, I don't know the main cause of homelessness.
All right, thank you for that great story on homelessness in the St. Louis area. Now joining us for the first time since Christmas break is the always interesting, intriguing, and entertaining Professor Avis Myers. He's going to go ahead and share some more of his career stories on reporters and news writers and just about anything you can imagine. Let's go ahead and take it away, Avis Meyer.
Two examples of journalism. Edna Buchanan, who is retired, I hope she's still alive, but I don't know for sure. She worked for the Miami Herald, and she was famous for writing leads that captivated the audience and held them all the way through the story. Won a Pulitzer Prize for this. Maybe she was only nominated, I'm not sure, but Pulitzer Prize material. For example, here's one. A man who was being taken to serve a life prison in Miami at the state penitentiary was in the back of a van in a heavy rainstorm outside Miami. He's in shackles in a striped suit, and there's heavy rain enough that the van calling him hydroplaned on the water and ended up going into the ditch upside down, not only knocking out the electrical system of the car. This is before they had cell phones. They had a phone in the car, but the two guards weren't injured, but they couldn't get out because the van's upside down, wedged between two sides of a ditch. And he's in the back, and the wreck sprung the back door. So the guy hops out in shackles on his legs and shackles on his feet with a black and white suit on in the middle of rain on the interstate highway. We'll say his name is Jack Dunphy. So Jack Dunphy runs across the field to a state highway department garage, which happened to be accessible. Broke into the door. This is early on a Monday morning, 9 or 10 o'clock. There was no one there. No one knows why. And he got the chains cut off, but not the shackles themselves, off his legs and his wrists. Then he decided, not being too smart, that he wanted to get something to eat. He walked across another field to a kind of a shopping center where there was a Kentucky Fried Chicken that had just opened. And Jack Dunphy, the prisoner, walked in, obviously a prisoner, obviously an escaped prisoner. Everybody started backing up and giving him room, and the guy behind the counter had just opened the store up. Told him to get out right now and started to go off the phone, and Jack Dunphy started to jump across the counter and grabbed a knife, and simultaneously, coincidentally, a state trooper who had stopped to get some coffee for breakfast came in the side door and barely saw this happening, told him to stop, police, and Dunphy turned around and started to come at him with a knife, and the state policeman shot him dead. Well, that's the story. The lead she wrote is much better than the story I'm telling, and it would grab your attention, and it's only 4 words. The 4 words were, Jack Dunphy died hungry. That's why she's Edna Buchanan. Another one of my heroes, Bob Woodward was in town about, I guess 3 months ago, by Skype, answering questions from a group of journalists, of whom I was lucky enough to be one. And Woodward took lots of answers and questions. Some of the best were, someone asked him, what's the first thing he thinks about in the morning when he gets up, considering what he's done and where he's been and how big a name he is in the industry. All from Watergate on through, he still does this kind of stuff. He thought about it, and he said, the first thing I think of when I get up in the morning is, what are the bastards hiding now? And everybody laughed in the auditorium because we all understand this. And then he added something that was very, very candid. He said he actually had been asked this question about 10 years ago with a bunch of guys sitting around talking somewhere in the Senate office building or the House office building, whatever. He'd given that same answer, but he didn't know it was on the record. And about a day or two after he had said this the first time, Harry Fleischer, who at the time was the president's press secretary, ran into him in the hallway and said, hey, Bob. He said, yeah, Harry. He said, you know what I think of when I get up in the morning first thing? And Woodward said he thought, oh, my God, he knows what I said. He said, okay, Harry, what's the first thing you think of? And Harry Fleischer said, the first thing I think of is, I'm a bastard. What can I hide? It's a nice association between politicians and journalists.
Thank you, Professor Meyer, for that interesting story that you just shared with us. Coming up next, we're going to go ahead and finish up our show. But before we do that, we want to remind you that you can check us out on Facebook and also email us at mondaysInMidtown@gmail.com. Once again, I'm your host, Willie McKenna. Now we're going to go ahead and finish up with Dr. Z. Schaefer, as he's going to talk about credibility in this week's edition of Communicating.
Good morning. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about credibility, what that means, why it's important. And I think a good person that you might ask about how important credibility is would be Rick Perry. Rick Perry is the current governor of Texas and was a former runner in the GOP primary for the 2012 presidential election. In one of the debates, Rick had, let's say, a credibility issue. He forgot one of the 3 major federal departments that he wanted to cut as part of his primary platform trying to get elected governor. So he named 2 quickly right off the bat and then stumbled for over a minute trying to remember the 3rd. You know that his credibility was hurt when the opponents he was debating were throwing out federal departments trying to help him out. Most of the time people can repair their credibility, but when you're a public figure, you not only have to repair your credibility to the public, but you have to repair your credibility with your staff. Unfortunately, Rick Perry was not able to overcome that. So let's look a little bit deeper at what credibility actually entails. 3 things: audience analysis, knowing who your audience is and what their needs are; competence and expertise, right, being able to talk with authority about different subjects; and sincerity, being trustworthy, being able to make sure your audience feels that you're believable, and not coming off as a used car salesman. So the point is, we need to be credible not just in politics, but really in any speaking situation, including religious, business, scientific, or academic. Because no matter how smart you are or how much knowledge you have, if you don't come across as credible, your message will be lost. So thank you. Have a good day.
Mondays in Midtown.
Yeah.
Oh, we the best. Oh, ooh, yeah.
Nah, we is the best.
Oh, I made it. Okay. We're back. What?
The setup amuses me.
Oh yeah, it's good stuff. It's ghetto rig. This is how Mondays in Midtown goes. All right.
Most of SLU-TV, guys.
No kidding.
So this is gonna run on Monday.
Yes. This is going to run on Monday.
Maybe. It depends.
Hopefully,
it'll run on Monday. We'll have a big premiere and everything. Is my wire showing?
Lady in red.